meeting for the Select Committee on Government Oversight to look at motor vehicle records, and we're going to call our meeting to order. I wanted to just open with just some brief goals for today. Our goals for today would include that we understand or look at three basic questions: how and why these fee funds for the electronic databases are increasing over time, so we want to understand those increases. Second, we want to understand the collections and how they are being used, if they're used to operate, maintain, and modernize the underlying information technology system, or if they're used in other ways for the Kansas Department of Revenue. And finally, third, we want to understand if these fees are, especially those paid by the high volume users such as insurance providers, are serving only a cost recovery purpose or are effectively subsidizing broader operations of Kansas Department of Revenue. So our goal is simply to review this fee schedule and to determine whether the fee structure is transparent, justified, and within properly aligned with our statutes. So those are our goals for today. Committee, you should have a folder prepared for you. Thank you to my assistant Jennifer for having materials readily available. Committee, also note that we did just finish the legislative post audit a minute ago, and other members, Sawyer and let's see, Tarwater and Francis will be here as well. All right, so let's go ahead and open up, looking for our daily agenda, with a review from Chris Wagner, our reviser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, committee. Chris Wagner from the Revisor's Office, staff House Transportation, House Appropriations. I'm here to provide an overview sort of the statutory federal law framework for disclosure of motor vehicle records. And so I'll start by just kind of give a brief summary. Motor vehicle records maintained by the Department of Revenue or the Division of Vehicles within the Department of Revenue. The procedure for disclosing such records to appropriate entities for permissible uses and the fee structure for such disclosures are governed primarily by the Federal Driver's Privacy Protection Act of 1994, codified at 18 U.S.C. section 2721 through 2725, and also in state law through KSA 74-2012 and 74-2022. I did attach all three of those to my testimony at the end if you want to see the full text. So motor vehicle records are defined in KSA 74-2012 as any record that pertains to a motor vehicle driver's license, motor vehicle certificate of title, motor vehicle registration, or identification card issued by the Division of Vehicles. Generally, statutes in the DPPA require protection of the privacy of personal information contained in an individual's motor vehicle record. And certain permissible uses are outlined in the federal law as well as the state law pretty much follows, is in accordance with the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, but adds in some additional permissible uses. And then finally, the fee structures are established through the state statutes. So starting with the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, generally provides that a State Department of Motor Vehicles and any officer, employer, or contractor shall not knowingly disclose or otherwise make available to any person or entity personal information, which is a defined term in the Act, about an individual obtained in connection with a motor vehicle record, except for any of the permissible uses as described in subsection B of 18 U.S.C. 2721. Personal information, as it's defined in the DPPA, is any information that identifies an individual, including photographs, social security numbers, driver identification numbers, names, addresses, phone numbers, or medical or disability information. And then highly restricted personal information cannot be disclosed without written consent of the individual, except for certain specific uses as outlined in the Act. And that just includes photographs or images, social security numbers, or medical or disability information of a person. On page 2 of my testimony, it starts a list for all the permissible uses that are allowed under the DPPA. Generally, permissible uses for disclosure of information obtained from motor vehicle records would include disclosing personal information for use in connection with matters of driver or motor vehicle safety and theft, motor vehicle emissions, motor vehicle product alterations, recalls, advisories, performance monitoring of motor vehicles, and dealers by motor vehicle manufacturers and other related purposes carry out certain other federal driver or vehicle safety laws. I just want to highlight a few of the permissible uses. State Department of Motor Vehicles, Division of Vehicles in our case, would be allowed to disclose motor vehicle records for use by any government agency, including any court or law enforcement agency in carrying out its functions, or also any private entity or person that's acting on behalf of any of those agencies. So that's number 1. Number 4 is for use in any connection with any civil, criminal, administrative, or arbitral proceeding in any federal, state, or local court. And number 6, for use by any insurer, insurance or organization, or by a self-insured entity, or its agencies, employees, or contractors in connection with claims investigation activities, anti-fraud activities, rating, or underwriting. For use by an employer or its agent or insurer to obtain or verify information relating to a holder of a CDL. Number 11, for any other use in response to requests for individual motor vehicle records if the state has obtained the express consent of the person for whom such personal information pertains. And then 14, for any other use specifically authorized under the law of the state that holds the record if such use is related to the operation of a motor vehicle or public safety. So the DPPA allows and authorizes the recipient of personal information, except under items 11 and 12 in that list in my testimony, to resell or redisclose such personal information, but only for the same permissible uses that are listed above or for the use in which they obtained the information, except authorized recipients that have gained personal information when the person's given express consent for the use of it can be used for any purpose. And then for a period of 5 years, the entity authorized recipient providing personal information to any person or entity is required to maintain identifying information for such disclosures and make those available to motor vehicle departments. The Act also provides unlawful acts, penalties, and civil action liability for violations of the DPPA and further sections in that Act. I'll move on to KSA 74/2012. This is the state law, and as I said, it's in accordance with the DPPA, but it states in subsection A1 that all motor vehicle records shall be subject to the provisions of the Open Records Act, except as otherwise provided in KSA 74/2012, KSA 65/24/22D, which is a vital statistics statute, and then 74/2022, which I'll get into, which is the creation statute for the Electronic Databases Fee Fund. So KSA 74/2012 authorizes disclosure of records for any of the permissible uses described in the DPPA, among other purposes, such as assisting the Kansas Office of Veteran Services in notifying veterans of facilities, benefits, and services available to veterans, assisting an employer and employer's agent to monitor driving records of employees required to drive in the course of employment. And on page 5, you'll see I put it in bold that among all those others is any other purpose authorized by the DPPA. So KSA 74, kind of moving on to some of the fee parts of these statutes. 74/2012F authorizes a fee to be charged by the Secretary of Revenue as determined by 74/2012 and 74/2022. The fee can be in an amount of not less than $2. for each motor vehicle record or partial motor vehicle record furnished or provided access to, but it cannot be less than the amount required for the cost of production or reproduction of any full or partial record requested. The division also may charge a lesser fee pursuant to a contract entered into between the secretary and any person or entity that the director is authorized to disclose motor vehicle records to for the purposes of KSA 74-2012. And then $1 of each fee charge is required to be credited to the Highway Patrol Training Center Fund, except for fees charged pursuant to a contract or for motor vehicle records authorized for disclosure to assist insurance companies or agents in conducting anti-fraud activities or to assist any agency in carrying out the functions of the agency. 74-2012 C2 authorizes the law enforcement agency also to disclose motor vehicle record information if they have access to that information. And that's upon written certification that the requesting party shall use the list solely for the purpose of assisting an insurer authorized to do business in Kansas or the insurer's agent to process an application renewal or cancellation of a motor vehicle liability insurance policy. I should note that the same goes for other records provided by the division, that it's upon written certification that the requesting party would use the list of names and addresses they receive from those motor vehicle records for the purposes I was listing off, for any purpose of the DPPA or anything else contained in 74-2012. Generally, I should go back and say that lists with names and addresses obtained from motor vehicle records they generally cannot be sold, given, or received because that's would normally be prohibited under KSA 45-230, but they can because an exception is in 45-230 that any of the purposes of 74-2012 they can give out a list and sell or disclose that information for those purposes. Then finally, I'll just finish with KSA 74-2012 does give statutory rules and regs authority to the department, but from what I could find, they have not adopted any rules and regs pertaining to motor vehicle records. So finally, finishing with KSA 74-2022, it creates the Electronic Databases Fee Fund and provides the authority for the secretary to charge fees related to furnishing copies of or allowing access to motor vehicle record information and any of the other public records stored in any of the department's electronic databases. So some of these databases would include the Vehicle Information Processing System, the Kansas Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal System, and the statute also says any other electronic database systems of the department. So in subsection A, it states that the fees fixed, charged, and collected by the secretary shall be set to recover all or part of the costs incurred to operate, maintain, and improve the electronic database systems storing motor vehicle records and other public records. And that fee would include the costs to furnish copies of or provide access to such public records stored in the department's databases. 74-2022A also provides that the fees are not subject to the provisions of KSA 45-219, and that is a provision in the Open Records Act that provides procedures for a person to obtain copies of or gain access to public records, and the fee structure for public agencies to follow when charging fees for furnishing or providing access to those public records. So moving on to section B, subsection B, this provides that all monies received from fees collected for providing electronic access or electronic copies of public records in the department's database systems would be deposited into the Electronic Databases Fee Fund. The money should be expended for operating expenditures, including expenditures for capital outlay, the operation maintenance, and improvement of the Department of Revenue's database systems, and the cost for furnishing copies or providing electronic access to such database systems. Subsection C is for physical copies of that are furnished or provided access to. Any fees that are charged for those physical copies would be remitted to the Division of Vehicles Operating Fund or another special revenue fund of the department specified by the secretary. So that was a brief overview of the statutory framework. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Chris. Any questions for our revisor, Representative Humphreys?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris wanted to make sure that I understand the Privacy Protection Act. So the highly restricted personal information, that's items 1, 4, 6, and 9 in your list. And those require permission, the specific, that the person has to give permission.
No, sorry. Excuse me.
Yep.
Madam Chair, Representative. So any of those items in items 1, 4, 6, and 9, they do not need express consent.
Those are the ones that don't need the consent.
Correct. But any of the other uses in that list for that type of information, they would need express consent for.
Okay. And that is according to the federal statutes. That's not rules and regs, or that's not a state statute. That's according, and those 14 things are, that's what's listed in the federal statutes.
Correct. So,
Okay.
and that's what's basically incorporated into the state law through 74/2012.
Okay, and, okay, I think that's what my question was. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? Chris, I do have a quick wrap-up question for you. So as we look at the 74-2022, and it relates to the electronic databases fee fund, it was established for a singular purpose, correct? To establish the electronic databases.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, so it does make an exception that some of the fees collected could be used or shall be used $1 per transaction for the Highway Patrol Training Center, and it does make an exception other than the database that copies may be furnished of the data from this fund, correct?
Sorry, can you restate that question?
So other than the database, the reason this statute was created, there are 2 exceptions for using those expenditures outside the database. One would be for the Highway Patrol, Kansas Highway Patrol Training Center, $1. And then the other would be for furnishing copies of such data if needed.
Correct. Yes, Madam Chair. For physical copies or providing access to physical copies, that any of those fees charged and the fees for gathering that information by the agency would be, that's credited to the Division of Vehicles Operating Fund rather than the electronic databases fee fund.
Okay, and my point for asking the question is the way that I look at this, if you look in section B, subsection B, it actually says midway down, it says all monies credited to the electronic databases fee fund shall be expended for operating expenditures, including expenditures for capital outlay for the operation, maintenance, or improvement of the VIP. It's the system. So it's not, the way that I read that, operating expenditures is not just any operating expenditures. It's operating expenditures and including expenditures for capital outlay for this electronic databases. Would I be reading that incorrect?
I think you're reading that correctly. It also says it includes the cost incurred to provide access to or furnish copies of public records in such database systems. So how that's interpreted.
Okay, so that goes back to my original comment that except for the Kansas Highway Patrol Training Center and any costs for physical paper copies, which we'll ask the department what that percentage or how much that they spend or how often those requests are. All other monies should be expended based on this. It should be expended for the operation, maintenance, and improvement of the specific electronic database systems. And the list is provided here. Okay,
Yes, that's
so I
correct,
just want to
Madam
be
Chair.
clear. That's what
Yes.
this money is for. This is why we're collecting money. It's for this system. So that's kind of what we want to get to the bottom of. Are all monies that are collected going to preserve, operate, manage, and upkeep this system? Or are those monies going in other directions and used for other purposes? So I just wanted to be sure that I was understanding the statute correctly. Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I will follow up on that, because if you look at KSA 74-2022, it talks about all monies expended from the fund are to be used for operating expenditures, including expenditures for capital outlay, the operation, maintenance, and improvement of Department of Revenue's database systems, and the cost for furnishing copies of or providing access to public records. That seems that might be a little bit in conflict, because then you look at KSA 74-2022C, provides all monies. It says all monies received from fees collected by the department for furnishing physical copies of public copies or providing access to the physical copies shall be remitted to Division of Vehicles Operating Fund or another special revenue fund of the Department of specified. It seems like there's more people involved in getting some of this money, other than just one department.
I mean, yeah, I believe to maintain the electronic database system, other entities are involved, but this fee fund is just under the purview of the Department of Revenue. And I don't know if that's answering your question, but
But then the dollar goes to the Highway Patrol.
correct, yeah. $1 of every record furnished or provided access to.
That follow. So within this, if all of it, all this money really goes to electronic access, then they have different departments within that system.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that the law enforcement agencies operate within this system, because if they have certain access to record information, then they can also they can charge a fee for furnishing copies. But they have to credit most of that, except for the cost for furnishing and the $1 for the Highway Patrol Training Center Fund, they have to credit that to the electronic databases fee fund as well.
So I'm trying to think what the issue is here, that other people are using this money that aren't supposed to be using it.
Ranking Member Ballard, we'll get to that. And I think if you have any more specific questions about the statute, then Chris can answer those. Otherwise, I think it will become more clear what we're looking at today. And I think the Secretary and as well as Chief Counsel Ted Smith, they provide an overview of our concerns. So I think those will come out really, really clear.
Okay.
Any questions about the statute? Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I've got myself slightly more confused. So the money shall be deposited into the electronic databases fee fund, but the way I see this, all monies expended from the fund are to be used for operating expenditures. Then it lists some inclusions, but it's not limited to a database system. It could be used for operating expenditures. Is that correct?
You could interpret it that way, but I think with the list, it doesn't say including but not limited to, which would maybe broaden that. I would say by providing that list, it would be for maintaining those systems and the cost to furnish them, and that fee can be anything set to recover the expenses related to maintaining those systems.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just personally, and I will accept this, I guess, but if you say including, it just means but not limited to, because it didn't put any limitations on it. That's how I would interpret that. And I feel like sometimes I've even tried to say including but not limited to in drafts of things, and that's not, I don't think, generally how we write it anymore, but I could be wrong on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, I would just say that we shouldn't be inserting language in the statute. We shouldn't be reading into what the statute said. We should look at the clear text of it. And my question to Chris was, am I interpreting it correctly? He said yes, he may want to change his mind on that, but the phrasing operating expenditures isn't a broad, it's related to the system. And because it says including. Of course, perhaps the department is going to interpret it differently. But for me, the clear text, it's this whole item, this whole statute is about one thing. It's about the electronic databases. It's not about all of the operations of motor vehicles or Department of Revenue. If it was about that, it would say that. It's about the electronic databases.
Madam Chair, if I could add.
Yes, please.
Obviously, that is my reading. That's, everyone can interpret things differently. Ultimately, it's up to the agency that's interpreting and enforcing the statute and for what they believe it could say.
Vice Chair Lewis and then Representative Humphreys.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just, I agree with Madam Chair that if this is all about electronic databases, because if you read on down, it lists the expenditures that are included, and then it says, and other electronic database systems. So it's suggesting that everything we're talking about here is an electronic database system.
Representative Humphreys, a couple attorneys here to weigh in with our personal attorney here today.
I just would like to make the point, if I may, Madam Chair, that what Chris wrote here in, this paragraph about 74-2022B, I mean, I just would encourage everyone to look at the statute and read that yourself, because that's where it came from. And Chris, I appreciate, you're doing this to help people to sort of synthesize what the statute says, but it's most important not that we read his words, but that we read what the words of the statute actually are. And then the other thing I just would want to point out is that Section B is about electronic and Section C is about paper copies. And so I want to make sure that we see that differentiation, if I may make that point, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And again, we will ask the department about the quantity and amount of expenditures related to paper copies. Hopefully, once we added this electronic database, it wildly lowered requests for paper copies, but maybe we'll be surprised. I will pause here for a moment if there are no further questions for Chris. Thank you very much, Chris. I'm sure we'll have more in the future here, but I will pause to say thank you to our Secretary Burkhart for being here today. Thank you for coming by request in case there were questions. Thank you to Ted Smith, the Chief Counsel. He was very good at taking phone calls from me this week and also providing some information that you have in front of you. And I'll mention that in just a minute. And Zach Denny, who always also helps coordinate all of our efforts. So I appreciate you all. If you notice, committee, there was a request made to Speaker Hawkins on November 14th, and the Secretary did provide a response, and that is the first one with a chart. And I think this chart is actually going to be helpful for today. So if you just take a glance at it, if you can find it in your folder, it looks like this. And it says memorandum at the top. And it has service codes to the left, which will be included in the Secretary's testimony. So we won't go into any details on this. I think it'll make more sense as we move along. It has the quantity, so the number of requests, has the gross revenues for each one of those. Notice we're looking at the third one down. Driver's license search. So if you make a note of that, that's kind of where we're focusing on. And the gross revenues for that happens to be $26 million for this current year, 2024. The portion that goes to Department of Revenue is $19.7 million. The Kansas Highway Patrol is 1.5. The fees are 5.2. And if you look at that, the fees are over to your right, and they're divided between Inc. and KIC. Don't ask questions about either one of those right now. We'll get to that in just a minute. The second document is a similar request from myself that initiated this process on March 16th, knowing that we would be having this select committee. So you're going to get similar responses, but you may get some information in the first one that you don't get in the second one, or it may be slightly updated. So I wanted you to have that for your reference. So the first person that actually provides testimony today will actually be Ted Smith. But before we do that, we're going to go into research. So Jacob is going to provide a brief overview of the fiscal analyst.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I am Jacob Klesby with Legislative Research, and I'm the fiscal analyst assigned to the Kansas Department of Revenue. So in your packets, you will have a document that looks like this. It may look a little bit familiar. Some excerpts are from the budget summary. I promise we will not be going into that same level of detail. This will just be a broad overview. So the first page does provide an executive summary of the agency and shows the 6 units of the agency: administrative services, aid to locals, alcoholic beverage control, division of vehicles, property valuation, and tax administration. Aid to locals is the only category of the agency in this out of this list that does not receive any sort of revenue from the MVR programs. And then at the bottom of page 1, you can also see an overall view of the agency's total budget and its percentage of the state totals. Before going into further detail on the rest of the document, if you will turn to the last page on page 4, this shows an overview of the electronic databases fee fund with actuals from fiscal year 2022 through 2025 and the current conference positions for fiscal year 26 and 27. This highlights the beginning balance at the start of each fiscal year, revenues and transfers, and most of the revenue from the MVRs is included under clerical services. There are also revenue transfers, encumbrances, and then with the total amount available in the fund each year, the total expenditures across the divisions of the agency, and then some additional context is provided to the areas of expenditures, and then the balance forward at the end of each fiscal year. Turning back to page 2 of the document, just giving a bit broader view of KDOR, this page illustrates a 10-year expenditure history of the agency. And if you will turn to page 3, this shows expenditures by program and expenditures by fund, and then a summary analysis of the electronic databases fee fund. I will call particular attention to the 4th line down in expenditures by fund, which is the second table on page 3. There you'll see a line labeled fee funds, which makes up 24.6 of the agency's expenditures. This highlights all of the fee funds within the agency, so not just the MVR program. But if you will also then look at the bottom of page 4, the totals of expenditures are listed each year. And that makes up around an average of 71 to 75% of all fee fund expenditures for the agency. And that is just a brief overview of this document, what is included with the databases fee fund for the Kansas Department of Revenue, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
All right, committee, are there any questions about the electronic databases fee fund? Jacob, do you have any idea on the salaries and wages, how many individuals that might include, how many FTEs?
Yes, Madam Chair. I do have an idea for the general amount of FTEs applied to the fee funds for the agency. As for the particular FTEs that are dedicated to this program specifically, that is something I would have to defer to the agency in greater detail. And my apologies, I misspoke. I have the list of FTE positions by program available. That just lists part of the administration, alcoholic beverage control and such. So as for the specifics of how many people are specifically dedicated to or paid out of the electronic databases fee fund, I would have to defer to the agency for further information.
Okay, but if I'm reading this out of the fee fund, am I correct in reading that for, well, since we were looking at 24, actuals for 24, that $4.6 million was taken out of the fund for salaries and wages?
Madam Chair, so 4.6 million is correct under the division of vehicles, but there are also expenditures for salaries and wages under administration, and then further salaries and wages under the tax administration programs as well.
Okay, I guess I'm confused because it says electronic databases fee fund, so everything below it, it looks like the totals are accurate, so it would be coming out of the fee fund, correct?
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, I don't know why I wasn't clear on your response. So $4.6 million in wages came out of the fee fund in 2024. Okay, so it's more than that. It's for administration, there's some, okay, now I understand what you're saying. So quite a bit for wages out of this fee fund, which if I'm understanding based on statute, should be just for the electronic database. And is it correct that the Inc. and KIC are the ones that actually run the database and we pay them 19%? You may not know that. I can hold that question.
I do know that the Inc. database is an external entity that KDOR does provide some of this information for, but some of these records and their maintenance are kept within the agency itself. So in reference to some of the previous discussions, so some of these expenditures are related towards the agency's maintenance of these records. So within the administration division of the agency, for example, there would be FTE positions where they are paid out of this fee fund as part of their responsibilities are dedicated towards the upkeeping of the MVR records, as well as the Division of Vehicles and Tax Administration. Part of this is, for the specifics, I would have to defer to the agency as how the staff is broken down, but I do know that there are, for lack of a better term, IT staff, and then there's been other historic replacements of technology within the agency as well. As for contractual services, which you'll see under these entries as well, that is where funds would be paid externally to things like Inc. and KIC outside of that, but the salaries and wages is dedicated to FTE positions within KDOR.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Any other questions? And committee, keep this handy because I think this will be helpful to us as we hear from Ted Smith. And if you have any questions for the secretary relating to that and expenditures. So if no further questions, thank you very much. Next, we have Jill Shelley. She's going to provide some historical and operational overview.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'll be working from this memorandum you have in your packet today. Looks like this from KLRD. I am here to provide some brief information on the fees that are charged, the records included and acceptable uses of them, prices charged in other states and the statutes that constrain that, and the role of the Information Network of Kansas in the sale of these records. Kansas has had a statute authorizing release of its motor vehicle records since 1929, and it started to charge for those records in 1945 at 10 cents a record. For context, Kansas began registering vehicles in 1913 and licensing drivers in 1931, so it was pretty early on. Since 1975, the statutes have required this fee charge to be not less than the cost of production or reproduction, with the lesser fee authorized pursuant to a contract. As Chris also said, in addition to these statutes, 1996 authorized the Secretary of Revenue to set fees for records from its computerized database, and that they recover the fees all or in part for those systems. The next portion of the memorandum is about acceptable uses of the information. I won't go into that too much because Chris covered it quite well. It is mostly from the DPPA. But Kansas, would like to point out that before Kansas adopted the DPPA in 2019 statutes, it had many similar requirements that are in what is the current DPPA, such as releases to manufacturers, lien holders, insurers, district attorneys, courts, businesses preparing statistical records and those working on anti-fraud activities. And then the memorandum does provide a little bit of information about disclosure that is not permitted, which also Chris covered. The next topic is prices charged. We had information from 3 companies that either provide or provide the fee amounts for this information. And we also have more about that in Appendix B. Kansas is ranked fairly high among, not among the highest, but fairly high among the states for their fees. On their website, Checker Trust describes itself as providing risk reduction services, MVR Decoder as a provider of driver records, and Samba Safety as an identifier of the fees charged by public and government agencies. So comparing state fees is complicated by the statutory constraints that are placed on those fees, and information on some of those statutes for the surrounding states is also provided on page 4. Colorado and Oklahoma have set their fees in statutes, and I did not find in the statutes the justification for at what rate those fees were set. Missouri allows its fees to cover only the cost of copies, staff time, and the medium used for the duplication. And it also limits the fee for bulk requests to no more than a half cent per record, unchanged since at least 2008. Nebraska allows its state record board to establish, quote, reasonable fees for electronic access to records, but says those fees cannot exceed the amounts for copies in other forms. KLRD was also asked to provide information on the role of the Information Network of Kansas, or INC, and that's provided on pages 5 and 6 and also in Appendix C. To vastly oversimplify, INC is the way that KNOR makes its records accessible. INC was created by statute in 1990 to provide electronic access for the public to public agency information, to oversee a network manager, and to perform other duties. The Kansas Information Consortium, a private entity, is the network manager that INC oversees, and its current contract runs through the end of 2026. The statutes also require INC to fund its operations from revenue generated from subscribers. Its startup costs were to be funded by private donations. The INC board determines the amount of user fees. In calendar year 2024, INC received $581 million in agency fee receipts and remitted $571.7 million of that to state agencies. About 85% of what INC does not send to agencies goes to KIC. Audited financial statements for INC show vendors that supply insurance companies with Kansas driver information are the largest source of user fee revenues. And with that, I'll try to answer questions.
All right, committee, now you're up to date on INC and other items. So Representative Humphreys.
Okay, sorry, quick question. The amounts that you just listed, what they receive, I'm sure I'm looking at it, but I just don't see it on what page would that be on?
If you'll look at the last page of the memorandum, it's provided from some
Okay.
Financial information that was available from INC.
Okay, on the last paragraph, the last page?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I couldn't find that.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Jill. Thank you for your great work. We'll be able to reference back to that. Next up, committee, we have Ted Smith. He is going to provide an overview. He is the Chief Counsel for Kansas Department of Revenue, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can everyone hear me all right? My voice doesn't carry very well electronically. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for giving the Department of Revenue an opportunity to appear today and testify. Also present is Mr. Secretary Burkhart with our agency. He's been the secretary going on 7+ years. Also is present is Zach Denny, our legislative liaison, and we'll all be available after this hearing or maybe even after the session to answer any further questions you may have. I'm going to begin the presentation, Chair, because I've been around the division through about 5 or 6 secretaries and through even more gubernatorial administrations. And I'm a little more familiar with the history of this than the secretary got brought on as a tax specialist. But the governor didn't tell him that he's going to spend most of his time dealing with vehicles. That's like the secret. So whoever the future secretary is, I'm giving you official public warning. But hearing your opening 3 questions that you want to address during the course of this presentation, if it's okay with the chair, rather than just simply reading my testimony, I'm just going to address those 3 issues and then take lots of questions.
Okay, first of all, we love it when people do not read their testimony. Number 2, we love to ask a lot of questions, so that'll be perfect.
All right, so let's begin with the fee schedule changes, because that's really interesting, and that's something that's affected the insurance agents probably the most and why we're here today. With that, I'd like to ask a little more permission to follow up on what Jill provided the committee and maybe provide you a little more of a story for how motor vehicle record sales developed. And again, feel free to interrupt. This will be quick. But in the early 90s, an actress was killed, and she was killed because the perpetrator found the data through a publicly available driver's license site. That was in California. That led to the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, which is pretty much why we don't have regulations in Kansas, is because we can just defer to 2721, and that's really what we work from. So when that got created, that sort of led to us sort of developing this program. And near around that time, there was some entrepreneurial legislative IT specialists who created the National Information Consortium, the Kansas Information Consortium. And they also participated in the creation of Inc. there around the same time. Now, up until a few years ago, the National Information Consortium was based in Johnson County, a publicly traded company, and was a big part historically of our record sales. So when you hear about Inc., you're going to see this number. The number we use is $36 million in my testimony in a given year. About $26 million of that goes to the Department of Revenue to support our activities with the operation of these databases. Now, we're probably going to disagree about what is authorized under statute, but before we go there, let's talk about the other $10 million and what it's used for. The Kansas Highway Patrol Training Fund historically has always received its dollar with regard to every transaction. And then we go with Inc. And Inc. is a public quasi-entity that supports a lot of different internet customer constituent services with government at no charge to a lot of different city, state, and county agencies. And a big part of what they receive in these motor vehicle record sales supports their operations, in addition to facilitating, they're sort of the conduit between us and LexisNexis or the insurance agents. Now, the Department of Revenue and OITS is going to do most of the work in developing the database systems. What Inc. and what KIC, Kansas Information Consortium, does. Now, Representative Waymaster, Representative Francis, you've probably been around long enough to know what these agencies are, but it can get sort of confusing for some of the newer members. But that sort of supports the activities of the Inc. board, and we've always been historically a big part of their revenue model. So now, hopefully I've talked enough about Inc. and KIC and confused you all enough in the Kansas Highway Patrol, and we'll focus on the $26 million. Yes,
Hey,
Chair.
we may take questions intermittently, so just hold up your finger and I'll call on you. So if that's the case, that Department of Revenue and OITS handle a lot of the background information of the data, then why are we paying 19% to two outside entities? That seems like a lot of money if you're doing most of the work.
Well, I mean, it's set by statute with regard to the Kansas Highway Patrol, and, you know, they're good partners of ours. With regard to Inc., that's a negotiated number between the state of Kansas and the Information Network of Kansas Board. And obviously, that number is always subject to negotiation. And if this committee believes that's too high as a percentage of the overall price of the record, then we will definitely take your advice on how to proceed there.
Vice Chair.
Just following up on that, so what does Inc. or KIC actually do?
Inc. does a lot of things for a lot of different state, city, and state agencies, but what it does for the Department of Revenue, outside, it does a lot of other things in facilitating payment for tax systems, but that's not really related to today's testimony. What they do for us is they maintain a system where someone subscribes and they basically confirm the identity so that we know that we're complying with the DPPA and 742012. And this is going to be interesting. There's a certificate of use. There's other documents that a subscriber has to comply with in order to get access. And that's what Inc. supports us with. The second thing represented, as a Lewis, the second thing they do is you have to understand there's a subscription fee that Inc. charges to all these insurance agents or other people using the system on an annual basis. I believe it's $125. That's not money I believe the KDOR receives, but that's important because the payment of money, the fact that we have access to a bank account, a confirmed bank account or credit card, that confirms that identity exists, and it gives us a lot more reliance on the legitimacy of the transaction. And as you'll hear later in my testimony, a lot of what the Department of Revenue is afraid of is web scrapers. People that get access to our systems and hit our system and pull all 2 million plus records within 30 minutes. And so what Inc. helps us a lot with is being the intermediary, making sure that we don't get abused, we don't get taken advantage of by people populating their own databases. But the issue of $2, how much we pay Inc., that's a negotiated number, and that may be subject to criticism or scrutiny from the committee. That's.
Go ahead, and then I'm going to insert after you.
So thank you. That's helpful. I'm still trying to figure out. So, like, I have a Westlaw prescription, and I assume Westlaw probably, like LexisNexis, gets stuff on, because I can also go in and find information on somebody, and I have to answer questions as to the purpose for which I'm asking the questions, and that must be part of this process that you're talking about, no?
That would create concerns for me. I mean, obviously, we have arrangements with LexisNexis where we basically review their procedures as far as vouching for identity, making sure there's not misuse.
Yeah.
So yes, that may be an aspect of it. I doubt it. I think a lot of what we do for LexisNexis has to do with insurance agents, employment, security, and even some law firms that are just trying to get some more context on, you know, potential defendants in a lawsuit.
Right, that's what I would use it for.
Yeah,
for
but
instance.
it wouldn't be really part of the Westlaw. It'd be a separate service. But yeah, that could be an aspect. Some of that fee may be coming back to the state of Kansas or to Inc.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, so just for clarity, the database and the hardware that contains or that's maintained that has all of this data is paid for by the state of Kansas. Okay, and would they have to layer on their own system in order to track all the subscriptions, or would that be something that would be embedded in the capabilities of what we pay for?
I believe Inc., with regard to a lot of these records, has a mirror database of what we have. But in most cases, they're sort of like confirming the handshake between us and LexisNexis as far as providing the information.
Okay, so that's great to know. And also, do you happen to know how many employees for either one of these that might be used to
Mr. Murray McGee is the program manager, and I can follow up with him after this committee and have him respond. But I think they have about 15 to 20 employees in the state of Kansas. And what they deal with is they may deal with a lot of calls from the public asking, why isn't my system, why isn't my motor vehicle record purchase working instantaneously? So they handle a lot of those calls for us, and we do get some calls also.
Okay, and then my last question, I'm actually going to refer this question to Dylan. We passed something in our budget bill this year that would require non-government organizations to disclose their 990s and provide us information. We also provided, we also just passed something about performance payments, performance measures. Well, they're not the typical performance measures. Would either one of those require Inc. or KIC to provide us information about their funding stream, for example?
Madam Chair, we're still waiting to figure out exactly how that's going to be implemented, those provisions, and verify that they're signed into law. But, conceivably, yes. I mean, these are the types of contracts that would require performance measures going forward underneath those provisions.
Right, thank you. So I guess just in the general question would be the number of employees that they actually utilize to carry out the MVRs, and also how much revenue are they gaining from the $125 for the subscription fees? But now I'll just be quiet and let you continue.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll follow up with you or Mr. Denny, and we'll provide you with that information. The other thing also about the subscriber fees is that's not limited to motor vehicle driver's license purchases. There may be other services they perform that require the payment of the annual subscription fee. With regard to Inc. and their revenue stream, they're a quasi-state entity, so I think their budget and where money goes and how they pay, I think we can look and we can provide you with some information on that. So getting back to the history, I'm trying to delay, well, actually, I'll just continue. But so anyway, we have the DPPA, which is in the early 90s, and now we're dealing with a motor vehicle record price of around $5 or $6, maybe $7 through most of the 90s. And then we move into, you'll see in my testimony on page 2, I sort of try to work up a graph here, as you're looking at about a $6. And at that time, you'll see that it's pretty consistent until about 2010. And at that point in 2010, what had happened is we'd had a person, a vendor, in 2010, maybe even today, you get these aftermarket warranty cards, right? And what happens is you get these postcards saying, who gets those? It's like, and what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure those weren't coming from somebody misusing our data. So what we did is we seeded our data and provided different sets to different vendors to try to identify if there was a weakness in our system. And we hit on one. And so Kansas is one of the few states that literally has initiated a lawsuit, collected over, well, we didn't collect, but we got over $1 million against a company called the Recall Center because they were misusing their access under the DPPA. We've continued to do that since, and we've fortunately not have any cases of abuse. But that being said, we don't really enter into contracts from companies from eastern Missouri, northern Florida, and that saves us a lot of trouble. But the thing is that along with a modernization effort that was going into a place sort of led us to have a consideration of what that price was. And you'll see in 2010, especially in 2013, our per card, our charge starts to go up. And what that had to do with is that we were confronted the Department of Revenue, and this is, again, prior administrations, but we had a modernization effort that was real expensive, and we had a $4 modernization fee. To this day, I believe the representatives still hear about this modernization fee every year. But at the time it was created and charged with every vehicle registration transaction $4 to basically cover our modernization expense. Now in 2013, in my testimony I say 2018, but it's actually in 2013, that money from the modernization no longer was directed to the Department of Revenue, but it was directed to the Kansas Highway Fund. So a part of this consideration was, number one, the litigation we'd gone through as far as enforcing the DPPA. the fact that we still had some expenditures or money due on the modernization project. And there was a review saying Kansas was on the low end of per record prices charged as relation to other states. Okay? And so that started this change in 2010, particularly 2013. And then you'll see in 2018 there was a further increase. Now, so today you'll see that we've raised it in at the very beginning of Secretary Burkhart's role as secretary, but that's been the only change we've done in 5 years. And the thing is what's happened is that in 2002, 2003, these electronic database fee funds were a very small portion of our overall budget for the Department of Revenue. But with these increases in 2010, 2013, 2018, all of a sudden it is a substantial funding mechanism in relationship to the Kansas Highway Fund or the State General Fund.
Okay, I'm gonna put you on pause for just a minute because we have a question from Representative Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for your service, Ted. We've been around for a lot of years together. All right, so one of the things that I'm confused about in your testimony, I understand about the $4 modernization fee. That should actually be called a $4 highway fund fee at this time. But so you increased it from 8 to 12 for the $4, or you're saying that $4 went in? I guess I don't understand, because that $4 never went on the fees that we're talking about today. It was a separate fee on registrations.
You're right. You're very much representative. I don't want to confuse this committee. What we're talking about today is something not associated with Kansas constituents and vehicle registrations or driver's licenses. So it has nothing to do with what you pay for a driver's license or what you pay to register a vehicle. It has to do on the back end to support various industries as far as making sure they create an appropriate insurance premium for their customers.
So just to be clear, from $8 to $12 had nothing to do with the $4 modernization fee, because that came from a separate place. And if I'm correct, the $4 modernization fee went to upgrade the treasurers, the interface between the treasurers and the Department of Revenue for the issuance of titles and tags and stuff like that. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, Representative. But I'm going to follow up with that and say that the Department of Revenue for the last 15 years has believed that those are appropriate expenses for us to pay via the electronic database fee fund.
The treasurer system is an appropriate fee to be used for the funds you get from this. Okay.
The question is whether that's the state-maintained application that you all paid for back in the 2010, 2011 period.
I just wanted to make clear that that $4 is not part of these fees.
So, yeah, and the thing is that at that time in 2018, 2013, there's a lot of variables that played probably into the secretaries making the decision they did. But in each one of those cases, Chair, we looked at the expenditures that the Department of Revenue had on IT-related activities associated with this, and we justified them under 74202, subsection B. That's been our position. And that's not just been direct costs associated with licenses, hardware, software. We've also applied that application to the support staff, the programmers that support these systems. And, that may not be consistent with some of the readings of this committee, but that has historically been the practice for over 15 years. Another thing I want to point out, too, is that when we provide a record, and some of you working in the IT industry, it's obvious here, but the cost for us to provide the record is almost infinitesimal, right? If someone says, I need Ted Smith's driver's record, the systems already exist. The work has already been put in to make that system reliable and valid and something that has value to a sorted industry. The issue, the cost for us is maintaining those databases and making sure that the data that goes in is correct and reliable. So again, we've taken the position that that price is more than just the cost of providing the record. The cost is in maintaining these broader systems. And as Secretary Burkhartz unfortunately had to find out, that unfortunately the driver's license system is really the core identity for a lot of different databases throughout the state of Kansas. You know, you've heard of a lot of, from Representative Proctor about someone being a citizen or not, you know, about doing save checks. We are a big part of the voter registration process. We register probably at least 50% of the public through our driver's license offices. We're a big part of the KBI, ks.gov, and the inlets. And all those systems, those are costs with staffing and with database application modifications that we have factored in. And I'll also point out in the numbers that I presented, Madam Chair, is that we've also apportioned a portion of our just driver's license examiner staff. A portion of them is also applied towards the electronic database fund. So when you see the numbers of salary that are supported, some of them have to do with business information systems, our policy and research, and a lot to do with OITS. And OITS is almost 19% of our overall KDOR budget. And most of that is probably more vehicle-oriented, because vehicle gets a lot more of the attention than our in-house built tax system, because there's a lot more people that are dependent on the motor vehicle driver's license systems than our tax systems. And, you know, Chairman Francis has to hear about the county treasurers and their needs. They're very legitimate needs. A lot of you have to hear about how can we improve voter election integrity. All those things relate to driver's license, and that way, that results in that statute, that process, that database having to change annually. And those are expenses associated with this. So anyway, does anybody have any, Chair, do you have any more questions about how we come up with the fee and why it's changed over time?
I'm sure there will be more questions, but you may continue with your testimony.
Thank you.
You might hit on number 6 of your testimony, which it talks about the costs for the hardware, both direct and indirect.
Yes. So when I talk about indirect, direct, maybe I should clarify what my understanding of the terminology is. When I looked at that, the direct has to do with database applications, maintaining equipment, maintaining software, licensing, and just automatic OITS fees charged to us as a percentage of that. With regard to the other 55%, I have suggested to the Secretary that that's made up of project managers, system analysts, system administrators that help maintain that system day in, day out to make sure that the information's valid and reliable. And a portion of that is driver's license exam and salaries.
You may continue. Is there any other items on here that you wanted to go over, or do you want to just stand for questions?
Let me just, can I move on to, I guess we're talking about necessary expenses. Now I'm going to subsidizing broader areas of operation. So I'm sorry, Representative?
Madam Chair, I just wondered what number was that on your, if we can follow.
Yes, I'm looking for that. Yes, it's item number 4.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah, you know what, Representative Humphreys, if you don't mind, I might just go through these questions real quick before I get to the final issue.
It's up to the chair, yeah.
Yeah, so again,
We handled item number 3, and I think that can also be brought back for further discussion when we have other individuals that provide testimony. So we're on item number 4, and we've skipped around, so just hit the highlights. So we can make sure we have maximum time for other conferees.
yeah, very good. I'll just real quickly, I'll move to one of the things the chair in speaking with me wanted to make it very clear. She believed that the Kansas insurance agents were paying too much and that it's too much of a cost for them to be able to serve their customers. And we talked through some ideas, and we're more than willing to talk with the industry after this meeting, and maybe there's some things we can do to help them. But one of the things brought up was can KDOR basically create a contractual mechanism where an insurance agent doesn't have to pay over and over again when he tries different insurance companies for a policy? We're open to that. We're open to having a negotiation with LexisNexis about controlling that. One thing the industry says as well, sometimes they're reaching out, they're an independent agent for a reason, and they reach out to different ones, and that would sort of be a hard system to try to control, but I'm interested in exploring that. A second issue is I wanted to point out to you is what Kansas does on driver's license status checks. So as you see in my testimony, this year we're on pace to do 74,000 free driver's license checks. Now, other states don't do this, or at least not to this extent. And the reason we can do this is because when we started creating the system with Inc. to serve the insurance industry, we had to create two different versions of a record. We had to be able to separate out the highly personal information that's associated with DPPA or diversions, criminal traffic diversions, medical information, spouses that are in a protective situation. And we had to create a second one that we could provide to the people, to the employers wanting to verify the insurance agents. And by creating that second version, we were able to create this free version, because this is effectively coming from the same data. And if someone can provide the personal information into these fields, we'll provide them with driver status information. We will provide them with a record history of things that have happened regarding accidents or traffic citations, because that's not public, that's not private confidential information. So I think what we can do better from the Department of Revenue's perspective is try to modify that service so that insurance agents can rely upon it, and more importantly, they can get their underwriters to rely upon it. But that's all I have. Anybody have any questions?
Right, and committee, if you know that on his testimony, he was referencing the Kansas driver's license status check, and it is a screenshot of how agents can go online and get this free information. And then his last potential recommendation is listed right below there, and we'll come back to that with conclusion. Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On that license check, does that just kind of verify that the license is valid, or does it also show infractions?
It shows infractions.
And accidents.
And it shows the KDOR notifications to the customer communicating status changes. So it goes beyond just telling you yes, no. It tells citations, moving violations. It also provides documentation to support that.
Great, thank you. That's good stuff.
All right, Representative Francis.
So just looking at this screenshot, if you've got a copy of the applicant's driver's license, you can go online and check it for free? Is that what I'm seeing?
Right. And so the problem, I think, is that, the agents need something to be vetted so that their insurance company will rely upon that information, right?
And they may not accept this.
This may not be sufficient presently, right? And so that's what we can maybe work towards.
Okay, and then just the follow-up question, does anybody ask for copies anymore? For MVRs?
Does anybody what?
Ask for copies anymore? Hard copies? Because it's in our original statute, and I was just curious.
It's probably 1% or less, and when that happens, usually they have their Facebook Live screen on, and they're trying to create a situation that'll basically generate interest on Facebook.
Okay, all right. If there are no further questions, we'll probably come back to you. So thank you very much for your testimony. And again, committee, if you look at the testimony, it's going to mirror what was provided to myself earlier, as well as to Speaker Hawkins. So you can compare and contrast. Next, committee, we're going to hear testimony from all of the individuals that are here in person. There's also written testimony. We'll take questions at the end, so please remember who you want to direct your question to. So welcome, Eric. He is here from the Kansas Department of Insurance. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Eric Turek from the Kansas Department of Insurance. As you probably know, insurance premiums with any policy reflect the risk associated with that policy. One's risk profile is used to calculate the premium. For car insurance specifically, as Ted mentioned, motor vehicle records, or MVRs, are probably the best way that insurance agents and insurance companies can really determine that risk that they are insuring. Those MVRs tell the insurance company what traffic infractions there were, what traffic violations there were, so speeding tickets, reckless driving convictions, DUIs, things like that. And all of that information is absolutely essential to for the insurance company to appropriately rate that individual. You know, when I first joined the department in 2022, one of the first concerns I heard from industry was these fees that they have to pay. So it's definitely a concern that we hear very often from the industry. It's absolutely out of our jurisdiction, the records and the fees for those records, but we do hear that it does affect the industry. Because ultimately that fee is passed on to the consumer. Since 2019, you probably all know that we've reduced the cost of doing business specifically for the industry by about $96.5 million. Every single one of those bills that's listed in my testimony, every member on this committee voted for all 4 of those, so we're tremendously appreciative of that. Including our internal efficiencies, that's how we got to that $96 million figure. We work diligently to reduce those to reduce or eliminate the costs that can be passed on to the consumer. We hear that this gets passed on, the fee itself gets passed on to the consumer for the MVR. So I know that there's an insurance intersection here. It's out of our jurisdiction, but we're happy to answer questions.
Right. Thank you, Eric. We appreciate you being here today. Next committee, we have Dave Holcher. He is the CEO and Executive Director of Kansas Association of Insurance Agents. So if you will direct your attention to Dave as well as his testimony. Welcome.
Cost of MVRs are having on the insurance industry. Again, my name is Dave Holcher. I'm CEO of the Kansas Association of Insurance Agents. We have members representing about 500 branch locations across the state of Kansas, and our members offer personal and commercial lines insurance options for consumers. The cost of MVRs is particularly important to independent agents because of what we do. We work with multiple carriers, and we need to be able to efficiently go and look what carrier options there are to make sure that we're adding the best value for our members. So in this process, we may run MVRs from multiple carriers and be required to do so just to find out which one will work best for the consumer. My goal today is to give you the perspective today of the insurance industry and the effect that we're having on a macro level. We've got insurance agents that are going to testify today that can more better address how these are used on a practical basis on a daily basis. I want to give you a quick history of kind of how we got here. About 5 or 6 years ago, my phone started ringing off the hook with what's going on with the cost of MVRs. I had a lot of agencies reaching out to me, sharing the impact, the financial impact, and the impact on operations and serving customers that this increased cost was having. You know, at the time in 2018, as we heard earlier, the cost was $1,370, and around this time they'd increased to $1,670. And we wanted to learn more. Why is the cost of these going up? And so we started digging in and trying to understand a little bit more that gets us to our point today. And it is a luxury to have Mr. Smith be able to share his history and background on how we've got here. We launched a survey after we learned about this to better understand what our members were paying on MVRs. We had about a third of our members respond, and the numbers were staggering. In 2023, our members spent $900,000 on MVRs. It translated to about $9,500 per agency. So that expense was very significant. Reached out to gain a little bit more insight on it. And the numbers that came back said that MVR costs from 21 to 25 have increased at an annual rate of about 13%. So the cost of these MVRs that our members are absorbing is pretty significant. I understand that the cost has remained the same over the last 5 years, but the damage was done in years, I think it was 2013, where it went from 870 to 1370, and then ultimately to 1670. That's where the true damage was done. We appreciate that MVRs have remained consistent since then, but the damage was done with those significant jumps. I appreciate the information that the KDOR provided on how fees were determined in the background with the revenue and the expenditures associated with it. In my mind, and we had a lot thrown at us from that testimony, but when you look at the information they provided, about 85% of the funds deposited in the EDF, roughly about 22 million, come from MVRs. 75% of that, or roughly 17 million, come directly from insurance-related entities. Yet the estimated cost and expenditures in maintaining that database is 13 million. So we have 22 million coming in MVR revenue, and 13 million that is estimated to maintain the database for that. So I think the biggest concern that we have, which you guys have been discussing, is our MVR fees subsidizing other programs, and the information provided from KDOR would certainly seem that way. You know, and I think that this disproportionately impacts insurance carriers, agents, and consumers because they're using this to, you know, monitor and rate policies. And it's so commonly used that it almost becomes tantamount to a tax on the insurance industry because of how often we need to use MVRs. We touched on this. Kansas ranks fairly high, top 25% in the cost of their MVR fees, 70% above the median cost. In the spirit of continuous improvement, and I think I heard Mr. Clark, or the prior testimony, Mr. Smith, right? I'm sorry, did I get that right? Yeah, so. I think in the spirit of let's try to reduce this cost. Let's work together to figure out how we can do this. So we ask for your support in trying to move this forward. MVRs are a necessary part of what we do. The reality is these costs find their way to the consumers. The Department of Insurance has verified that these costs ultimately find their way to the consumers. So consumers have been paying more in insurance lately, and we need to do everything that we can to make sure that we keep those premiums as low as possible. I also want to share my appreciation for Commissioner Schmidt for being very proactive to reduce fees with the insurance department, as well as to make sure that she's finding ways to run that more efficiently. I think she's done a great job, and so thank you for them. Lastly, I want to say the insurance industry contributes $200 million to the state general fund on an annual basis through premium taxes, surplus lines taxes, and I just think that having to spend this much on MVRs is an additional burden that I don't think the insurance industry should have. Thank you for your time, and I will stand for questions unless you want to hit me up later.
Yes, we're going to hit you up later. Thank you
Okay.
very much,
Yep.
Dave. We appreciate it.
Yep.
Next up, we have another Dave Vogel. He's Vice President of Insurance Sales and KAIA President, Pro Value Insurance LLC. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the time and opportunity to share my perspective and our perspective on MVRs. just a little bit about Pro Value. We're a wholly owned cooperative, meaning that we are cooperatively owned and that the farmer cooperatives throughout Kansas and a few other states are our ownership. And the revenues we earn from selling insurance policies, commercial insurance policies to the commercial grain and feed industry is used to turn around and provide services back to our members in the form of human resource consulting, safety and compliance services. Simply, MVRs are an essential part of the underwriting process for our insurance companies. They come with new business applications, they come with renewal applications, and then oftentimes throughout the year when there's individual issues that go on with a driver, the only way to have a conversation due to the privacy laws and issues that have already been presented here, we have to have that MVR to have that discussion with underwriting to deal with a misinterpretation or a misunderstanding of what's going on. We have to advocate for both the insurance company and the employer or the driver in terms of getting on the same page, in terms of making sure that the right drivers stay on the road and the wrong drivers are kept out of commercial vehicles that are out on the road. So this is in the public's interest, of course, to make sure this is being done properly. Our agency spent right at just under $40,000 on running MVRs in 2025. As it was stated, privacy laws make it very difficult for independent agencies to share these MVRs with anyone else, including the employer, the driver themselves. Okay, so what happens is that the insurance company, the independent agency, and the employer are all running an MVR on the same driver at the same time because they say it's privacy. A lot of times it's simply the cost. The cost is the reason this information is not being shared. But this is kind of how silly this has gotten, to where this much time and money is being spent to discuss one document, essentially. And it's the whole point of running MVRs is to ensure that unacceptable drivers are kept out of commercial vehicles. And of course, with our agency specifically, we're talking about people driving grain, tractor trailers, grain, feed, fertilizer, chemical, fuel, propane, anhydrous ammonia, some of the just most hazardous stuff that's going down the road. Making sure we have got the right drivers in those vehicles and keeping the wrong drivers out is, we all agree, is an important tool in risk management. And that's why it's the expectation that these MVRs get run. It's not an option. We have to run them. I mean, they have to get run, they have to get used, and they have to get interpreted correctly. And that's essentially the end of my point. I apologize for the Dave three-peat you have here, but we'll get through this. I thank you for the opportunity and welcome any questions.
Thank you, Dave. We'll take questions at the end. We appreciate your comments. Next, for our final Dave Lane, Vice President of Property and Casualty, Eddie's Independent Group. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee. I apologize for being the third Dave here today, but I wanted to take a little opportunity to tell you about our operations. We're a mid-size agency out of Wichita, Kansas, and we do a lot of home and auto insurance as well as commercial insurance policies, but we have $151,000 worth of fees just in 2025 alone. And so over the past 5 years, I can tell you that number's over $500,000. That impacts our business in more ways than one, but the ability to put employees in seats that we need, customer service reps where, insurance carriers are changing at a rapid pace. They cancel policies for underwriting reasons. It just puts an undue stress on the ability to just utilize our expenses. So when we quote somebody too, we may go to, we have 12 carriers. So we may look at the top two, run a quote. If we run a quote for one household with 4 drivers, that's $66.80 for one quote. And so you extrapolate that by thousands of quotes a year. It's a big expenditure. So let's see here. The other Dave's covered a lot of my stuff, so let me move on. California. We do a lot of business out there as well. They do $2 per MVR. I notated that Kansas is currently the 11th highest, so it's not really in the middle at all. So I don't really understand why the cost is so different, because they're utilizing LexisNexis throughout. We're pulling the same information, and it's the same quality state by state. But in conclusion, I mean, really just looking for transparency, where those dollars are going, and want to make sure that they're going just for that MVR pool and not lumping other things in.
Right. Thank you, Dave. Great
Thank you.
testimony. We appreciate that. Next up, committee, we have Marley Carpenter, Kansas Association of Property and Casualty Insurance. Marley, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I am not a Dave, so I appreciate your time. I'm here on behalf of CAPSIC, the Kansas Association of Property and Casualty Insurance Companies, representing domestic property and casualty insurance companies in the state. MVRs are records that are a very important tool in the process as companies determine premium amounts and premium adjustments. Attached to my testimony is a chart on the information of MVR fees across all 50 states. And as you can see, Kansas ranks 9th in the jurisdiction out of 50 states. Since 2019, we've worked with others in the insurance industry and have even met with KDOR expressing our concerns about these increasing rates. We appreciate the time spent on this issue. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
All right. Thank you, Marley.
Thank
Committee,
you.
if you will take a look, there is additional testimony, and at your leisure, please take a moment and review those. Before we take questions, you may have questions for any of those that have provided testimony today, including those from Kansas Department of Revenue. We'll take a few minutes on that. And then I'd like to conclude with about 10 minutes to 15 maximum for committee recommendations. I have something prepared for you to review and look at. We can edit or not recommend at all, but I did prepare something. So for right now, we'll take about 10 minutes or so of questions for those. We'll start with Representative Tarwater, and please designate who you'd like to come answer that question.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I've got just a couple of questions, and anyone can answer it. But can someone tell me what is different about the information on the state check that's free versus the NVR?
Dave looks like he knows what did you want to answer it, or would you like to answer it?
Hat trick of Dave?
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we'll let Department of Revenue come up and speak. And then Dave, if you want to add on, you can. So go ahead and Ted.
I'd like to hear from them both.
Okay, we would like to hear from both of you.
Yeah, very good, Representative. I don't have access to what LexisNexis shows most of these agents. So maybe there's a meeting or a lunch sometime in our future where you show me what your system shows and I'll show you ours. But I think the big difference is there's some limitations on Social Security information and some other issues regarding medical status or codes that may be associated. But regarding the accident history, assuming your accidents only go back 3 years on what you see in the VR, that's what you'll see in our public record check.
Let's have Dave number 3 come up and tell us from his perspective what the difference is.
Yes, so on the driver's license status check, it does show all the violations and the MVRs. The issue is the carriers will not utilize that. You can't just screenshot it, send it in, and then update a quote. They have to pull the information from LexisNexis to get the MVR ran into ultimately quote and bind coverage.
Representative Tarwater.
So they're going to do that anyway, though. One of you stated that everyone pulls their own, like the company that employs the driver will pull one, the independent agent will pull one, and then the insurance company will pull one. And so would this suffice for you to make a decision on who to, like if you saw there were 3 DWIs on a person, you could pull the free one and say, hey, there's 3 DWIs, you can't be driving.
Yeah, so it is a very useful tool in some circumstances, so you can eliminate options to eliminate the duplication of MVR runs. But like there's certain commercial carriers, for instance, they won't accept it as an NVR, particularly because of the disclaimer on the online driver's license status check.
But they're pulling their own anyway, right? Or do you send them
We
the
have to
NVR?
we have to pull them.
Okay, all right. My next question is for Eric Turk. Thank you, sir. And so the commissioner has done an excellent job, and we've heard from everybody, that what a great job she's done in cutting expenses and making things easier for agents. Is this something that could be housed in the insurance commissioner's office that would be able to pull one MVR and share it with the carrier, with the company, and with the independent agent, so that there would be one fee or a lower fee? Since you guys are good at cutting fees, can you take this over?
Madam Chair, that's something I think that could absolutely be a discussion point for our 2 agencies. It's something we had never considered. It would require a lot of conversation if that's something that needs to be explored.
Okay, and I will also point out that one of you guys said there was $200 million in state premium tax created from the insurance industry. I think you left out income tax. There's a lot of high-paying jobs in insurance, and so $200 million doesn't scratch the surface on what the insurance industry does for the state of Kansas. Thank you.
Yep, yes, hold on, Eric. We chatted about that. I don't know what that total might be, but it is a significant amount. And leave it to Representative Tarwater to give a really creative solution of moving this MVRs to the insurance. Yes, you wanted to comment.
Yeah, and and Representative Tarwater's correct in that the $200 million remitted to the SGF, that is just the premium tax. That doesn't include the income tax from the companies and other taxes.
And I'm also going to add on to your comments, Representative Tarwater, that though the carriers are pulling separate and the agents are pulling separate and the employers are pulling separate, that sometimes the carriers, because these prices are just becoming more and more, are passing that along to the agents, and that's a problem. And it depends on the volume. So it may be that you might not get any charges, but then if you write or you bind with someone. So I think it's a problem at all levels.
And it gets passed down to the consumer of the insurance and of the business. When the business sells something, its expenses were higher, so their products all get increased. I mean, it's a problem.
Absolutely, it's a problem. And bottom line here, I think most of us would agree. We want to make sure that all of our fees are associated and are managed and are for the purpose of what they were raised for and not used for other purposes. We've all been pretty consistent on that particular item. Representative Vice Chair Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So anyone can address this, and it's always been, well, the question is, I heard that the carriers insist on LexisNexis, and they won't take MVR records. Why is that? Is there something special about what Nexus does to massage the numbers or guarantee the numbers, or I don't understand.
That LexisNexis has 50 different state departments to work with to gather data. So it's more efficient for carriers to rely on one vendor as opposed to 50 different states coordinating those efforts.
But the data, it's not that the data is any more reliable, it's just that they have more of it, and it's more comprehensive. Yeah.
That's my understanding as well, yes.
Thank you.
Real quick, I was going to call you Representative Carpenter. No, did you want to add on to that? Yes, if you don't mind. Yes, and then Representative, you're next. Okay, sure.
I'm sorry, the information contained on the driver's license status check is a summary only and will not display any sanctions on records from another state. Completion of the items listed below does not ensure your driving privileges are now valid. So, and it continues on. So we're concerned, the carriers are concerned because of this disclaimer on the department's website with the free check.
For the rebuttal, Ted, and then Representative Ballard.
Not so much rebuttal. I agree. And the thing is this is a big enough issue, Chair, that we could revisit what is on our website. We could revisit a different output for a specified industry. You know, the question is whether the underwriters or the bigger corporate entities would accept that. That's something we could work with the insurance commissioner about, saying, hey, if you're going to operate in the state of Kansas, this special output from the Department of Revenue is reliable for your purposes.
And before you leave today, for those that are interested in the meeting of the minds, and I'm talking about you all in the seats, we're here to support. We'll have our own recommendations. I'd ask or invite you to stay and exchange some information so you could get together, so that by the time 2027 comes up, and if any of us are sitting in these seats, we can help implement along with the agencies. So Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I could have taken either one of the 3 days, but I happened to pick up on Sean Myers. And Sean is providing written testimony. Oh, just written only. Okay, well, either one.
Dave, 1, 2, or 3.
I'll take 2. You know, if you ever look at prices, right, 2 is always my door.
I was thinking more of the dating game, but that's okay.
So
All right.
I'll just take 2. I'm just looking at this in terms of your independent agencies that have multiple locations across the state.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess the question I want to know, would your the motor vehicles you're looking at, does that vary what you come up with as far as cost is concerned by the town, or I'm going to be very specific,
No.
their license plates or their county?
No, I think that I'm pretty sure it's only by state. So if you have to run a Colorado MVR versus a Nebraska MVR versus Missouri, but I don't think within the state of Kansas, I think the cost is going to be the same no matter where.
So my other question would be, if you had to say, what's the worst thing you have to deal with, or what you consider the inconsistency, what would it be?
I think in cases where there's a misunderstanding on a misinterpretation of the data, of the information in an MVR. An example would be somebody's got an interlock requirement, okay, that's written on there, okay? And that's likely due to they've been cited for a DUI, but that DUI could be 15 years ago, okay? And it's well outside the parameters of a problem in terms of acceptability issues. The driver's fine, but I got an underwriter saying, can't drive, got that thing on there. And the only way we can have that argument on our end is to run the MVR.
Got it.
Okay?
Okay.
The only time
Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Representative Francis.
I think she's still going.
Hold on.
No. Okay, so that's it. But then do you have to, does this take longer to get the verification of what you need? How long ago? Is it something that's going to, they've repeated or something? Or does it just take too long, or you just have to charge that?
But we have to pay the fee, yeah. I mean, it happens quickly. I mean, it's not the matter of running it, waiting, or anything like that. That's part of the process is quite convenient, to be honest.
Okay.
It's just a matter of the cost.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, we're just all trying to get our minds around this. So Representative Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one of the things I don't understand is, I understand that the cost may be higher than it is in other states, but why can't you run it once, share it as a certified copy with the other different underwriters that you need to share it with, and then maybe at the very end you do have to run one more so that you can verify that that's accurate? I mean, they won't let you share a certified copy? Your underwriters?
We are, it's our understanding that, and a lot of laws and statutes were referenced earlier, our agency's always understood that under I thought it was the Fair Credit Reporting Act, that meant that as an independent agency, we can share information between the underwriters because technically we're an agent of the carrier, okay? So there's nothing that really prohibits a carrier from sharing an MVR and vice versa, back and forth. We always say it's privacy. I'm like, it's not, it's cost, but they always change the subject when you bring that up with the carriers because that's can you just send me the MVR? No, we can't, it's privacy. Well, it's actually cost, I think. So, but we are not allowed, the slippery slope that we get worried about at the independent agent level is sharing the MVR with the employer, our customer, okay? Because if we do that, then now we are considered to be a consumer reporting agency, and we're now responsible for the accuracy of that information, and we're trying very hard not to be labeled or be held accountable for what might be wrong in there, because there are sometimes errors just due to human reality of inputting data and tickets and accidents, and sometimes information sometimes is inaccurate, and we don't want to be at risk for that. But to answer your question, why can't we just keep a copy of it and then have it later? Technically, yes, but the information is no longer current. In other words, if I keep a copy of that MVR and then it's 6 months later, I can't give a 6-month-old or a year-old MVR to an underwriter because something could have happened in the 6 months. They could have gotten another ticket or another at-fault accident, and now they become unacceptable.
But, I mean, what triggers the fact that you got to get a new MVR on the guy? I mean, when you get how often do you have to get an MVR on a driver?
Yeah, I want to speak to like how it depends. It depends if there's CDL, hazmat. So that's kind of a complicated answer to that question. But ultimately, annually is what most insurance companies expect those MVRs to be run, is annually.
Well, and I thought I'd heard testimony earlier about the family of 6, and I've got to get 6 of them, and then I've got to send it with 3 or 4 different underwriters, so I wind up running up a big bill. I guess my question is, why don't you run the 6 one time, then share that one with each of your underwriters because you're an agent for them rather than
at the
having
same
to run
time?
it 6 times?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's a fair point. I mean, if they're run at the same time and distributed, I mean, can I run an MVR and share it with 5 insurance companies at the same time? Yes, of course.
And the reality of this thing, I understand you only want to pay your fair share. I'm not trying to take away, but we use these fees to fund this department. And when we bring down this revenue source for this department, we're going to have to increase the fees on somebody else, which may be legitimate, but just trying to understand the real issue.
Sure.
Okay.
Right.
All right, committee, we're going to take a pause 1 second. Hold on, Representative Humphrey, she has the question. But we're going to, Jennifer, if you go ahead and pass out potential recommendations or questions. While we're looking at these, then you can still ask your questions, and actually, if we have extras, I hope that we do for the audience. And we'd like this to be a discussion so we can look forward to ways to resolve some of these issues, to reduce costs, make sure the costs are truly reflective of the data systems that they're receiving. So if you'll take a minute and look at these, and then we'll keep this discussion going, and then we'll decide if there are any items on this list that you would like to have as a committee recommendation. And of course, we can add to it, and I think I've heard several additions already. Oh. Okay, I think there actually was a third page too. I don't see it.
We only have 1 page.
I had an updated, which had another page, but that's okay.
We have 1 page.
Right, there's supposed to be another page, but we'll hit that, all right? So I updated it. I sent you, sorry about that. I sent you an updated version, but that's okay. There are additional items that I've added to it. And so Jennifer, if you'll look on your email, do you have that? Okay, and that'd be awesome. All right, so we're going to open it up. I'll go ahead and begin with the first one. I think the first item is pretty basic, and so I think we would just like more clarity on the expenditures. If you look at what was provided by Jacob, I think this is very helpful, but I think if we could break it down so we can really make sure that it's for the operation, the maintenance, the improvement of the electronic database. And I think that's going to require a full breakdown and a full accounting of that. And actually, on item B, on item B, making sure these are the same, it makes a recommendation of some information that you could include. Does that look like something that we could get, Ted? Pretty easily? Okay. So I think that would be very helpful. And then the item C under number 1 is really that prevailing question about, are these MVRs paying a disproportional amount? And I think we'll get a better idea once we look at B and A in its totality. And to your point, like for example, the Kansas driver's license status check is part of that electronic system. So whatever it takes to prop that up, I'm sure we would want it to be included, but we just want to make sure that those employees that are listed in the budget are truly propping up the electronic database.
Very good. I can follow up with the chair, and I'll say that the 75% number provided by the insurance company representatives is correct. They carry the lion's share of the costs.
Okay. The second question is really a question that it truly is a question. I would really like us to know and understand, is KDOR compliant? KDOR is interpreting it operationally in a broader sense. However, you also shared that you've got a lot of behind-the-scenes work that goes into maintaining the record, which sounds legitimate. But I would like us to review the statute and make sure that every expenditure from this fund, this fee fund, is truly compliant. So if all the attorneys could review that and be sure that we're on the same page. Item 3, this is something that was brought up by the industry as well as has been agreed upon, or at least to look further at it, relating to the contracts and policies. So with the intent of, let's look at ways to reduce costs. And so we talked about Inc. and what that contract may be, and is that appropriate to be paying 19%? If we pay for all the maintenance of that system, and if we have our own employees working the background, is that truly an appropriate amount? And then also we've heard about the duplicative costs. We've got to figure out a solution so that when you are pulling for one individual over a window of time, that there are not multiple charges for that window of time. So, did you guys all get this? This is the second page. Thank you, Jennifer. And I think that there's a way to do that. And then Ted shared with me that seemed like something reasonable. So I would like for you all to hammer out what that would look like and how we could get there. And additional solutions are listed on number 4. These are just things for us to think about. I'm not suggesting that we do them. And so if you like one of those or any of those, you can make a comment, or we can decide which of these we would like to recommend, or if our recommendation is just that there be an unofficial ad hoc group that meets and comes back to the legislature and the agency. But adding a statutory cap, such as up to in our statute language, because right now we don't have anything like that. B, consider a cost-based accounting. So that really just means that we're going to make sure that whatever fee we have is going to pay for the intent of it, the electronic intent of it. And then you could add an additional 20% to help absorb. This was mentioned or alluded to by Representative Tarwater, but it goes to the insurance department and the insurance industry, providing a lot of money, $200 million in premium fees as well as income tax. And is there a way for that to help offset any deficits that may occur? There are some other items listed here. Review carrier systems that integrate with insurance rating systems and add discounts. So LexisNexis, is there anything that we can do to reduce costs for these carrier systems? E, allow for a competitive bid. So that, again, that's coming back to Inc. That 19% seems pretty high, so maybe we should consider opening this up for RFP. And the last one is consider utilizing insurance verification system and any violation fees, again, to backfill. Any violation fees related to MVRs. Those are some suggestions. And so we will open up for continued questions. We'll start with Representative Humphreys. And you can direct your question or make your comment.
Okay, great. Thank you. I don't know where to start. So I love all the suggestions. My question is, if we're number 11th highest, there's 39 states doing something different than what we're doing. And I'm just curious, are those states under the Department of Revenue? Do they have something similar to Inc. that they use? I'm assuming Lexis is charging them the same, but what do other states do that it's such a vastly different cost to the people that are asking for the records? So can we look at that and get any suggestions?
Representative, I'd say that most of the states have a similar setup that we do with National Information Consortium, because the insurance companies like to deal with one entity. So it's not so much Inc., but their partner, which is Kansas Enforcement, they have similar relationships with most other states. Now, there are some that go independent, and that's something we could explore. The second question is that we've talked a lot about the DLR fee, right? Because it's $16.70 and it gets your attention. But there are a lot of other transactions that we charge that are much higher frequency that the insurance companies use for like monitoring. See, the cost here is when the customer walks in that door and the agent wants that business and he wants to support that person, they have to do the MVR record check. The thing is that once they've signed the agreement, we have systems in place that are like Sense, where we basically do monitoring, and we only tell the insurance company that they need to look deeper into the record when something significantly changes. Because we don't want to create an excuse where they have to buy the record every month or every 6 months. So we have millions of other transactions that are going on that we're paying nothing or cents on the dollar to monitor.
So you're saying other states are charging for those things? And so if you added that all up, or is that what you're saying?
I can't speak, Representative, for what the other states do. I will tell you that Kansas is sort of unique in the way that it manages its division of vehicles, because we have to set a budget with the governor, we have to set a budget with the legislature, and we have to set a budget with the highway fund, with the Department of Transportation. A lot of other states are fee funded, so they're based on other transactions, driver's license, vehicle registrations. Kansas is a little bit different.
And I would be interested if our research department could do a little bit of research on that. Do they all fall under the Department of Revenue in the other states or whatnot? So, okay, that kind of speaks to just a quick question. This is the memorandum to the speaker from the secretary, and it's got this chart on the front.
I'm very familiar with that.
Okay,
yes,
so
Representative.
what are those last two columns? I understand, what the 1, 2, 3, the first 5 columns, and there's a blank one, the Inc. fee and the kick fee. What does that they don't add up. The other columns all add up, but what are those 2 columns exactly specifying?
Okay, so I'm looking at the TLRLST. I'm looking at page 1 of Speaker Hawkins's report, and
Yep.
you're asking about a specific service code on the line?
Nope, I'm asking for the last 2 columns. The first,
Oh,
it's
the ink fee and the-
kick fee. What is that?
Those are fees that are negotiated with the Information Network of Kansas and KIC.
But they don't add up. So just looking at the driver's license one, that, the gross is 26 million. If you add up those next 3 columns, that equals 26 million. What are those last 2 columns?
Those are not really associated with individual record price purchases. They're sort of an aggregate, helping with monitoring or other types of things. So they're not exactly a motor vehicle record purchase on Ted Smith. They're a different type of concept. They're a header file.
So is that added to that?
Hold on, I'm going to
26 million?
insert
I'm
here
sorry.
because I
Okay.
had the same question, Representative Humphreys,
Yes,
but the
okay.
fee here
Yeah.
is actually these 2 fees. So if you add the 1 million plus the 5.7 million, you're going to
Okay,
get the
thank you.
6.7.
Thank you. That's very
And-
helpful. Okay.
And I
That's
asked
all
the
I
same
was
thing,
asking.
and Dylan or
Okay.
someone on our call said, hey, would you
Thank
just
you
look
for
at
your
that?
Okay, thank you. And then my very last thing, it just is about the salaries and wages. 3 different places. It's like over $14 million in the electronic database fee fund on the last page. I don't know how much these people are getting paid, but, that's a lot of people that, are involved in somehow taking care of all of this. And so I'm assuming that's some of our questions and some of our suggestions on what we should do, but I don't know if you can, it's, an average of $65,000, that's going to be 222 people. So I'm just curious about what all those people do.
No, I'm happy to hopefully clear that up with you. Again, $17 to $18 million of our budget in 2024 went towards OITS payments, and a lot of that had to do with salaries of staff, probably more than 50%. Now, that's not completely carried over to our estimate of EDF expenses, but it's a big portion of that. A second part of that is, again, this may be subject to criticism from the committee, but I took all the state driver's license examiners and I took 20 to 25% of their salary and I affixed it towards this category.
So you're paying for their salary out of the electronic database fee fund?
In justifying how we reached that number, yes.
Okay.
And then there are
Interesting.
a lot of internal department. We have a team called the Office of Special Investigations, and they were created to do investigatory work associated with Real ID and determine lawful presence. And so some of those people are part of this budget salary because a lot of their time is spent going into the DL offices and looking at people, seeing if they're legitimate or if our examiners are committing fraud. So,
Okay, thank you for indulging me. I
And
appreciate
actually,
that.
we could add that on this list, if we adopted any of these items, we could add a number 5, which is comparing the other states and their costs and look for the best models. And then number 6 would be Representative Humphreys, which is an explanation and a justification for the salaries paid for by the EDF, which would also include the total number of employees. Because I think if you looked at that a little bit more closely, I bet we'd find that probably not all of them would be attributable to that. If they were, then I would say that we were really spending too much on the other 2, Inc. and KIC. So
maybe a few less license plates every year would be great in that regard.
well,
Thank
I
you.
mean, I'm not saying, right, fair enough. And I'm not saying we shouldn't pay for it. I'm saying that the insurance agent shouldn't pay for it. So there's 2 different things. So definitely I'm not saying that they're not necessary, but very, very fair. We're going to go with Representative Ballard. She will have to leave early, then Representative Tarwater, and then Representative Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, my question again goes to like Inc. and KIC and how much do they really play into it? But you know what, having listened to all of this, and we're looking at, when the question was asked, how does Kansas compare, we'll say, well, we're similar, but on the other hand, we're very different in many ways because there's fee funding going on that may not be the same. So when I look at how how we're different. The question is, why are we different? And how can we change that to make it more effective in many ways? I think we've just touched the surface in many ways today. We're looking at what it is, why we are, or the inconsistencies that we might have, or the information that might be missing when you have to actually do the motor report. For me, I would say I am not comfortable taking any of these. I would say we need to look more into this instead of going with a recommendation after an hour and 45 minutes of a problem that's been going on a lot longer than that. And I would say we would probably do better to look at it another time or two and see just how different we are, what's effective that's working for us, and specifically what it is that we want to change because of the inconsistencies that's really going on. That's where I would be.
Thank you, Ranking Ballard. Actually, that's what these recommendations are. They're not saying change policy to X, change policy to this. They are simply saying request KDOR to provide a full breakdown. Is the KDOR compliant with the statutes? We just have to look at that. On the next page, it says recommend KDOR conduct a review of contracts and policies. Additional solutions for operative word consideration. So those are things that we could adopt to look at. This is not saying that this committee is recommending these things. They're saying this committee would be recommending this research be done and provided back. That's what we're doing. And then once we have it, then the next group that has to, maybe it's your committee next year, transportation, or maybe it's appropriations, or maybe it's this committee next year. They can look at what they bring back and say, you know what, on our side, we'll take that. And on the agency side, they can implement many things without us. All right, Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I got a question first. Inc. and KIC, they're both political subdivisions of the state, right? Yeah, they are.
Representative Tom Sloan, past representative, is the current chairman of the Inc. board.
Right, but they're both political subdivisions of the state.
Yes, sir.
And so we could negotiate with them or change the fees.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, Madam Chair, it seems like
Okay, there is a little debate going on right now about the level of quasi-government, if they're statutorily created. I thought the original testimony was that KIC was publicly traded. Did I mishear that?
So you have the Information Network of Kansas, who we contract with. They are a quasi-government Kansas entity. And then you have their partner, KIC, or National Information Consortium. They're a private entity. So the thing is that I don't read anything in the statute to require us to use KIC or Inc. However, they're very good partners of ours historically, and they support a lot of other activities throughout the state of Kansas. But there's some states that have done this in-house.
all right, so that kind of gets to my point. There's a lot of things in this fee, and the only thing that should be in this fee is to compile the data and issue the MVR, and run the system. It seems like we are running different departments that do very good things, especially, like the KHP Training Center and all that. Those are all great things, but I think we need to find different ways to fund these great things, not on the backs of one industry that are pulling these MVRs. I mean, that is not fair. I mean, these are great things, and every one of these categories could be funded somewhere else because they do a lot of other things. And it was stated earlier by the chairman that this runs the department, or these are the fees that are used to run a lot of the department. And that's not how it really should be. If we're gonna charge one industry fees, it should be for the service that we provide them, not the rest of the state. And so I would ask us to consider that going forward, that we need to look at better ways to fund these other things and only charge our insurance agents and insurance companies what it actually takes to create their MVR that they're paying for.
Okay, would you like to add that as an item to review other options for Kansas Highway Patrol Training Center funding? Because it looks like we're funding it about $2 million annually.
Well, I mean, Kate, the Department of Revenue doesn't need $26 million to run MVRs. They're using it for running a lot of their other department.
Correct, but by statute, $1 of these MVRs is designated for the KHP. Do you want to, is your thought to maintain it, or is it your thought to review it?
Well, I mean, that is a small percentage. That's 6% of the fee. It's not that big of a deal. But
I didn't,
I'm talking about all these other things, the Inc., KIC, Department of Revenue. That's all a lot of bloat money that we're charging one industry for. We need to figure out a better way to fund those if we're going to use them.
Okay. So I think, so
How about
you don't.
we limit the fee to what it actually costs to run the system?
If you limit the fee to what it costs to run the system, then that small amount, 2 million, would go away. We would fund it elsewhere.
Right, and so would a lot of the 26 million.
Right. Yes, absolutely. But I think then we could include a review, other options for KHP Training Center. If you don't want the insurance industry to pay for $2 million of the Kansas Highway Patrol Training Center.
I'm not necessarily saying that, but those are your words, not mine, just for the record. I'm not saying that at all.
Okay, but you did say that you wanted the fee to fund what it's intended to.
Yes, I did.
So I mean, I can, if we want to maintain this, I'll strike it. Okay, he doesn't want to comment on that. So, all right, we're not going to bring that one up right now. That's in statute, but if anyone wants to discuss that later, and that's something that Representative Francis can look at too, from the state highway funds and maybe the overarching costs of the training center. But we'll leave that for another day. That is $2 million. That's a small amount. Is there anything on here, Representative Tarwater, who very experienced with insurance, that you feel like we may be missing in terms of how to move forward?
Just a recommendation to see if the insurance commissioner can figure this out.
Oh, you want to add the insurance
Right.
commissioner?
Right.
Okay, so item 7 would be request insurance commissioner. And do you want the secretary of revenue to, what kind of phrase to me what you're thinking?
Just a way for the insurance commissioner to house the data and run the MVRs for their agents and their insurance companies.
Okay, so the way we would word this in the recommendation is that a review of benefits, possible benefits, pros and cons, if you will, of moving it to the Department of Insurance. And we will certainly love for our staff to word that in an appropriate way. Okay, so we've got that added on. Did you have something else? I know you're short on time.
Well, yeah, but until we decide this, I may just be late going where I'm going. But what I'm saying, am I understanding that you want to go with 1, 2, and 3? I mean, we're going to do all of this?
No, so what this is these are not to be implemented. These are items that we're requesting. So if you look at number 1, request Department of Revenue to provide us data. So that's all that is. That whole section is our request to provide more data about the fees, which Ted said he could do. So that's number 1. So that is something they can do. They can email us. We can have it. It can be reviewed at a later date. Number 2 is just a review. And actually, if we do adopt this, I would say on number 2, we would strike number 4 at the bottom. That's an opinion statement. And basically, it would be a review of the statute. So we could actually word that as review of the statute and compliance. So we just want to make sure we're doing exactly what the statute says. So that's all that is. Number 3 is recommend Kansas Department of Revenue conduct a review of contracts and policies. We heard today there are no rules and regs for the purposes of reducing costs. That's why we're here today. So we want them to look at it with that in mind. We wanted them to look at the duplication, and this is something that Ted and I spoke about, as well as the industry representatives, about how if we had a window of time, and that could be determined, is it 5 days, 20 days, that you could make a request on an individual and you're not going to be hit or dinged every single time. Once they're tapped in once over that period of time, then there's no additional fee. And that's something that would have to be, there would have to be discussions with Inc. probably, and I'm not sure who else that would require this. And then it also says provide legislative and administrative recommendations to the select committee prior to the 2027 session. And then those items listed on number 4 would be possible, it could be worded as possible things to look at. There could be bad ideas in here, but I'd like for all of these that the Department of Revenue, the Commissioner of Insurance, those that are from the industry to look at these possibilities and then make recommendations. These are not our recommendations. It's our recommendations to review and to provide us back information.
All right, may I?
Representative Ballard and then.
Yeah, I understand that.
Representative Sutton.
It says these, in a way though, these are our recommendations though, because we're asking and requesting a variety of things. So I think we are in many ways. The one that I'm glad you didn't mention was doing something with the $1 fee for Highway Patrol Training Center, because I think that fits in a totally different category, and we shouldn't even be going in that direction, but, well, the rest of the people have to go with it. I just don't think at this point it is necessary to have all of these things done. Maybe we should look at how we differ than other states, what fees they are charging that we're not charging, and if there's other areas that we don't feel we should be involved in, maybe we can identify those, but it's up to the rest of them.
Representative Ballard, you wouldn't want to know what's happening behind the fee fund? Because that's what number 1 is. It's just the financial data.
Well, you can look at one and leave it alone.
Well, this is just, you're correct. These are recommendations to get information back. We can't do anything unless we have a bill or working in a bill. We can't, yeah, there's a bill. We can't do anything anyway. We are not, all we're doing is passing recommendations to look at these items. We cannot do anything until 2027, and it would have to be in the form of a bill, and the agencies would be able to implement some things potentially right away. And that's what they have agreed to do, is they've agreed to look at these because they agreed that is something that they'd like to do.
I voiced what my concerns might be, and it's up to the rest of the committee.
Okay. Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could I ask a question of Mr. Smith? Yes. All right. I saw you dozing off over there, so I had to get you back up here.
It's slow metabolism, that's all.
Now, you mentioned that KIC was a partner with the state in a number of other issues too. What sort of other things does it do?
They do hundreds of things. Like the recent Amber Alert system that was created, that was done with support from Inc. They funded that program.
Okay.
So what happens is that Inc. helps us. They help us a lot with tax processing, which is going on now, but they primarily deal with payment processing. But what Inc. also does is they take requests for grants from other state agencies, like the Amber Alert program, from a lot of cities needing help with ADA, HTMLs on their websites, and they basically issue grants from their budget to support those activities.
Okay, now their budget, that gets me going there. How much of their budget is occupied from those grants and so forth and all the other things? Or is it being supplanted and supported by these fees?
I can't give you a percentage, but I can tell you that it's significant what revenue they derive from doing motor vehicle record sales. It's a large part of their budget revenue.
Interesting. If Madam Chair, if I could include, if there's some way, I know they may not, they're not exactly governmental, but if we can look at the amount of money that goes to Inc. and what percentage of that comes from motor vehicle records, I think that would be really interesting to look at.
I can get that information for you, Representative Sutton.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, we'll add it to our list. And Representative Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know I've spoke with Revenue about this. I probably need to warn Troy, Representative Waymaster, about this. But one of the things I'd like to have done as an interim committee, what we have at Department of Transportation now is we have what's called ordinary transfers. And I believe Department of Transportation transfers around $55 million a year to revenue. But some of those fees, we always talk about license plates, you know, the $45 and $50 are directly attributable to them. And I think it's time that we kind of clear up some of our fees that go into Department of Transportation, and also look at fees to give to the Highway Patrol and carve out those pieces so that it's not this annual food fight, you know, where he talked about the fact that they're partially funded by fees, they're partially funded by Department of Transportation, even though most of that money comes from fees that are passed through to the Department of Transportation. So I think an interim committee could, if it was done correctly, could increase the transparency and give us an insight on what legislation ought to look like.
Okay, very good. Committee, anything else? All right, so what would be the will of the committee? Would you like to make these recommendations so a group of individuals might move forward and review potential solutions to bring back to either the legislature, but also to those in the agency? And if so, is there a motion?
I just have a question.
Okay, yes. Okay. We have a motion and to accept them all with the edits to make sure that they are in the vein of review only, not as actual actions we would like to take, and to remove any editorial comments that I may have included. Is there a second before we go to discussion? Second by Representative Humphreys. We'll go to Vice Chair and then Representative Hoy.
And perhaps this isn't necessary for purposes of voting on the motion, but you mentioned that there'd be a group that would look at these. I mean, is that the idea to bring it back to this committee? Or how's that? How do you envision that looking?
So that's a great question, and I would love for those individuals that would like to work on it, including if there is a member from this committee, please meet in the back afterwards and perhaps give your names to dial-in, and we'll have a note of that so you can keep in touch with us. I can let the speaker know that you're interested in working together, you're going to start communications, and how much time do you think you would like, and then I'll let the speaker know, and then if he would like to bring us back together for a part 2 before we all head back to the 2027 session, if we are reelected, then he will do so. Does that work? Yeah. Okay. All right. We have a second, Representative Hoy.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to recommend that we do 1, 2, and 3, and then direct Department of Revenue to work with interested parties to find ways to lower the MVR and add it to the transportation interim study. But with the more specifics included in this, I don't, and considering that there probably is a bill out there, I don't want to put my approval on this full recommendation at this time.
Okay, and just a note, these are not recommendations in terms of we want a statutory cap. These are recommendations to look at these things. So that group would, it's like a brainstorming list. That's what this is. It's not saying that you give your stamp of approval, because we wouldn't want all of these things. But we do want them to look at them all, and hopefully others as well. But duly noted. Any other comments? Yes, Representative Humphreys.
I'm just making sure that you did add 5 and 6.
Yes,
Or
and
was that
so
included? Because
I-
I would want to make one note about the salaries and wages. When you look at this report, it's right up there, 50% of the expenditures are the salaries and wages. And so it just seems imperative that we just at least look at that and try to understand it.
Yes, and they have those penciled
Okay,
in.
thank
And
you.
also on
Okay.
page 2, when we talk about that $1 fee for the Highway Patrol Training Center, maybe just add the word review next to it. So we'll just review that. Are there any other items from industry, revenue, insurance that you think would be important to add in here? We would, of course, add a notation, any other solutions, so something that would be open-ended, because this list is just, it truly is a brainstorm list. Anything else that anyone? Okay. All right. So all those in favor of adopting the recommendations for review purposes only, say aye. Aye. And any opposed? All right. Okay, there was a no. It wasn't unanimous. All right, the motion carries. The committee, great work today, and thank you so much for being here, and hopefully we'll have some good recommendations in the future. We are adjourned.